Yeah, well, I mean, the gender issue is really an interesting one, because one of my professional domains of expertise is individual differences. I'm a personality psychologist, and so I know the gender difference literature. And it's a very solid literature. Well, first of all, it's very solid. It has a 30-year history. Once psychologists got the personality models down, so that would be the Big Five model, all empirically derived, straight statistics, right? Brute force empiricism. Nobody had a theoretical axe to grind with the Big Five except to say, maybe there are human traits, maybe they're encapsulated in language. We can use statistical techniques to find out what they are. That was it. That's the whole ideology. So very, very neutral as far as ideologies go. 5 traits emerge. Okay. Are there differences between the sexes? Turns out there are. All right. They're not massive, although if you sum them across all the traits, you can separate men and women with about 75% accuracy. So it's not trivial, but you have to sum across all the traits. Then another question comes up. Well, are those differences sociocultural or biological? Okay, we can test that. We'll go around the world, we'll look at cultures, we'll rank order them in terms of the gender equality of their sociological policies. We can do that with broad agreement from the right and the left. Then the hypothesis would be, if gender differences decrease among more egalitarian societies, then the gender differences are sociocultural, or at least more sociocultural. That's exactly the opposite of what was found repeatedly. That's pseudoscience. It's like, no, that's mainstream psychology. Those papers have thousands of citations, and the average humanities paper has 0 citations, right? And then the next most common one has 1. 3,000? That's an unbelievable classic. And here's the other bit of proof. Like you say, well, how do you know that you can trust someone's judgment about a fact? The fact emerges despite their ideological presuppositions. Okay, so it's well known that the social sciences and the humanities have a left tilt, and a lot of that's temperamental, and the tilt has become more pronounced. But as Jonathan Haidt has pointed out, there are no conservatives among social personality psychologists, or none to speak of.
Very few, yeah.
Very few. Vanishingly few. And if the field has a bias, it is definitely and indisputably a left-wing bias. Okay, so you have to fight that if you're a scientist, right? Even if you're a left-wing scientist, you have to fight that because you want to get to the facts. It was these social scientists who generated the data that suggested that the gender differences not only were real, but that were bigger in egalitarian societies. They didn't do that to grind their ideological axe, because their ideological presupposition was, no, you make the society egalitarian, men and women get more the same. It's like, nope, they get more different. Oh, isn't that something? And so then there's a corollary there, which is, all right, you could still say, and they're kind of pushing in this direction in Scandinavia, boys and girls are different. Men and women are different. It looks biological. But because people are malleable, you could push the sociocultural structure harder and harder to minimize the biological differences. Okay, well, first of all, maybe and maybe not. Maybe you'd get a rebound and they'd get even, like, the kids would rebel. That could easily happen. But let's say, okay, you could. The problem with that is that if you cede that much power to the state, like, you're basically giving the state the right to socialize your kids.
Right.
It's like, you really? You really want to do that? I mean, the people in Israel couldn't do that with the kibbutzes, right? It didn't work. So people aren't going to give up their children to the state, and thank God for that.
Well, I mean, this is one of the big questions that we were discussing earlier, is that we were talking about, the polarization in politics between right and left. And obviously, you're a psychologist, you're a philosopher, but you've been dragged almost kicking and screaming into this political sphere because everything has been so politicized. And so when you cite social science statistics, and they're scientifically based, you're called a racist, you're called a sexist, you're called a homophobe, and
called Milo Yiannopoulos.
Exactly. So why is it that why do you think it is that so many folks on the left who purport to be all about reason and science and objective fact are so willing to throw those out the window the minute that it becomes politically inconvenient for them?
Well, because you imagine that a cognitive system, so an interpretation of the world, has levels. They're axiomatic levels. Some fundamental presuppositions are more fundamental than others. And you could say, well, the leftists historically, maybe because of their atheistic rationality, are more on the side of science than, say, the fundamentalists of any sort. But when push comes to shove, you find out how the axioms are nested. There's deeper axioms underneath that, which is that all hierarchies are based on power, and all power plays are based on group identity, tribal identity, essentially. And that the entire history of the world is nothing but a power play between these different identity groups. It's like, okay, well, if the science indicates that some of that's wrong, then do you alter those beliefs or do you alter the science? And the answer to that question is, well, it depends on how you've hierarchically arranged those. If the science is at the bottom, then you alter your beliefs, right? If the scientific facts are the axiomatic substructure, then you alter your beliefs. If your beliefs are the axiomatic substructure, then you alter the science. Well, we've seen how that plays out. And one of the things I've tried to do, so to speak, is to diagnose the axiomatic structure. It's like, okay, what's the metaphysical presumption structure of the radical left? Well, what it is you're basically your group. Your groups are basically engaged in warfare, right? And the warfare is arbitrary, except insofar as it serves your group. Okay, I don't buy any of that. I think that's a route to certain disaster. I think it's a degeneration into tribalism, and that we will seriously pay for it. Not only because it returns us to tribalism and tribes fight, as the anthropological evidence for that is overwhelming, right? Tribes fight. It doesn't even matter if they're chimpanzee tribes. Even chimpanzee tribes fight. So not only do you regress to a tribalism, but you also invalidate the one proposition that's been able to help us arise above the tribal, which is the idea that the individual should be sovereign. And so I think the culture war is about what's the proper framework within which to view human identity, and what's the relationship between the individual and the group in relationship to that identity. And the leftist answer is, it's all group and it's all power. It's like, okay.
Did you know that every like on this video creates one additional glorious leftist tier? Don't ask me why. That's called science. To take advantage of this amazing opportunity, just hit the like button.